Today's session is going to focus on holistic learning, and I really want to thank Daniela for setting us up for this conversation stage. As the Director of Teacher Learning and Leadership at the Center for Professional Learning and Childhood Education International, I have the incredibly good and great pleasure of working with educators around the world and across the US. And CE International has been working to co-create innovative solutions to education challenges since 1892. The work that we're leading at the Center for Professional Learning is really focused on efforts to support educators who are working in displacement, migration, crisis, resettlement, among other contexts, to ensure that lifelong learning opportunities are available. And we do that through a variety of means, which I'll share with you today, because I'm hoping that each of you will walk away with a small toolkit that you can use for your own professional growth, but also to support your colleagues, your administrative team, your district team, even your school board and community members. Childhood Education International undergirds all of its work with what we call the Will Action Framework. And our goal is really to create thriving and enabling environments for child development and learning. At the Center for Professional Learning, that means working with teachers. So it's across the lifespan. Even though we say child, we're looking across the lifespan at well-being, innovation, learning, and leadership. And we know that if educators' own well-being, their own innovation, learning, and leadership is supported, they can then focus on these elements for their students. And that's part of what we consider our holistic learning strategy. And it's why I'm so pleased to talk with you today about this topic. But before I go any further, I know that there are so many incredible scholars and practitioners and community members in the room, so I want to bring forward your experience and expertise. I'd love to hear how you define holistic learning, or how is it being defined in your school, your district, or your program if it's being talked about. What does it bring to mind for you? When you think of holistic learning, what comes to your mind? So I'd like you to scan the QR code if you're able. It'll take you to a Padlet. In the chat, a link will be shared. See that? And in the chat, we're seeing, thank you so much, Melissa, being open to a variety of contributing factors related to the student's environment, not just the academics. Great. And over on the Padlet, we can see providing learning experiences organized after knowing the students. Thank you, whoever wrote that. So knowledge of students being very central to holistic learning. Taking into account the mind, body, and spirit, not only the academic standards and skills. Thinking about daily life learning, learning about basic skills, cooking, taking care of yourself. I love that. Thank you. Incorporating non-traditional educational topics like emotional intelligence. That's wonderful. Thinking about the development of the whole person, all these aspects, intellectual, emotional, social, physical, spiritual. Thinking about the background, the culture, many things that we've been hearing about today. This is wonderful. I'm returning to the chat and seeing, carefully considering all the needs of a child, including the well-being of the child's parents. Thank you, Linnell. That is such a great point, and it harkens back to some of what we were hearing this morning about engagement of the family being so critical in this work. Thank you very much. Supporting the students in their different needs, nurturing and developing the whole person. This is wonderful. Thank you very much for your insights and your ideas about what this means in your context. Returning to the slideshow, I want to share some work that we've been doing around quality holistic learning. So this is global work that has been trying to define this idea. What is holistic learning? And then what are the qualities of it? And what does quality engagement and delivery of it look like? So this slide shows a definition that was created by teachers who were working collaboratively from Kenya, Lebanon, Niger, and the US. These are all teachers working with immigrant, displaced, and refugee learners. And they were trying to really consolidate their thinking. What is holistic learning? How can we define that for ourselves, for our communities? And what they decided is very similar to what many of you shared. They said it's a pedagogical approach that takes into account the learner in every aspect, the academic, the emotional, the social, the physical, the psychological. They had a much longer list that we consolidated. They had the artistic, the creative, the spiritual, etc. Within a learning program that will allow all learners to develop their knowledge, their competencies, their values, and their social skills. So the other thing that our team, our Quality Holistic Learning Project team of educators thought about was the positioning of the learner. They really wanted to position the learner in the center, and they wanted teachers as learners to be part of the center of this learning ecosystem. And then they imagined 5 core areas for attention around that learner: asset-based pedagogies, social and emotional learning, differentiated instruction, psychosocial support, and well-being. Interestingly, these were areas that were coming up in conversations across various spaces, and areas that teachers felt they could lean into, in some ways similar to the results that you're showing. And so we have another poll question, which is thinking about your competencies as an educator or other service provider. Where do you feel you're the strongest? Is it in asset-based pedagogies? Is it in social and emotional learning, psychosocial support and well-being, or differentiated instruction? Just thinking about this model, this one singular model, which of those 4 areas do you feel the strongest in? Okay, interesting. All right. So differentiated instruction, that's a different sort of result, and I'm excited to hear more from the group about that. I hope we'll have a little time later. And also social emotional learning has been very present in the ether, right? All over the globe and all over the country. So not surprising that many of you are feeling well supported in that area. But very interesting that the psychosocial support and well-being is an area where many people want to lean into or grow into alongside asset-based pedagogies. Thank you. So this picture shows some of our colleagues in Lebanon in a current project where they're co-creating, they're co-learning, co-developing social and emotional learning activities. They're thinking about how can they implement this in their schools? How can they implement this with each other? They're really trying to use that will model, thinking about well-being, innovation, learning, and leadership as a way forward in their work to support their students and to bring this to their students. And we hope that each of you are finding such opportunities with your colleagues for your own teaching and learning spaces, and or that you're creating such spaces for yourselves and your colleagues. It's really important that you have opportunities to talk with each other, to really build things together, to bring your heart together, and think about this very challenging work. So one thing we would like to offer today is our library of open education resources, and the link will be dropped in the chat in a moment. These are available to you and your colleagues. They're free, they're open, and they're there to support your professional learning. There are online and offline materials. So there are slide decks that you can download and modify. There are courses that are already developed and online. There are micro-credentials that'll also be shared in the chat. There are handbooks, there's much more. And these have been created by teachers for teachers in Ukraine, in Lebanon, in Niger, in Chad, in Kenya, in the US. These are in a variety of languages, and we really hope that they will support you and your colleagues in your growth. We invite you to join in this work and connect with us if you have questions. We hope these will support peer-to-peer learning, social learning in your professional learning communities and your communities of practice in the upcoming year and this summer. I want to pause for a moment and return to language before I go further, because as we think about holistic learning, language is really important. We started with trying to define what is holistic and what is holistic learning. And many of us who are working with culturally and linguistically diverse learners of various statuses, including refugees and immigrants, will recognize many of these words. So I want to pause for a moment to ask, how do you refer to your students? And how do others in the building or in your program, your organization, refer to the culturally and linguistically diverse students in the building or in the program? What is captured in these labels and what is left out of these labels? I know that as a group of educators working with refugees and immigrants, many of us are acutely aware of the language and what's packed into that language. Thank you. I like that, Janice. Future citizen. I love that. Things that are left out: students' assets, their dreams, their prior schooling experiences. Many people have sliced students. Good. Perhaps what's missing is the words refugees used to define themselves. Thank you, Christopher. Exactly. And so despite our desires to capture and consolidate categories of learners, and we do this for data and evaluation purposes, we do this for funding purposes, we do this for many reasons, but we know that in fact, refugee and immigrant students are represented in every racial and ethnic census category, every student subgroup, special needs, gifted and talented, unhoused or in foster care, et cetera, et cetera. And we know that these students are racialized and overrepresented in some categories or subgroups within our school systems. We also know that everyone, including our amazing students, is comprised of complex and uniquely intersecting identities that include so much more than their language abilities and their immigrant and citizenship status. When we think about holistic learning, we need to think about how we are welcoming every aspect of the learner and creating belonging, safe, productive, and joyful learning spaces for every child, every adolescent, and every adult. I loved hearing this morning about the multilingual read alouds, about accessibility and inclusion, about technologies and intentional and creative use of AI, and then just now from Daniela about mental health. And so much of what's being shared in these sessions is speaking about this holistic approach and thinking about the many aspects that are interacting in our students' lives. And thank you for the continued conversation in the chat. Keep that going. Each presentation today has touched upon different and intersecting aspects of students' identities and their shared asset-oriented approaches to building upon students' unique talents and interests and abilities. This is what we consider to be holistic learning. This is what each of us is called upon to do as educators working with immigrant and refugee students. We have to account for all of this, for everything in our wildly creative, challenging, and always shifting work. And we know that things are getting harder and harder with each passing year. So it is hard, this is clear, but fortunately, there's a burgeoning field of scholars and practitioners who are focusing attention on refugee and immigrant education, including many or all of you on this call. Here I share a few books that you may enjoy reading. These could be book studies in a professional learning community or community of practice. The two books on the left, Monisha Bajaj and colleagues, Humanizing Education for Immigrant and Refugee Youth, and Mandy Manning and colleagues' book, Creating a Sense of Belonging for Immigrant and Refugee Students, are very practical, and they can inspire curricular change, school culture change, or other transformative initiatives in your school, your district, your organization, or your program. I highly recommend them, and I recommend them as a shared learning activity, a holistic shared learning activity for you and your colleagues. The book on the right by Sarah Dryden Peterson gives a larger global picture to help us situate some of our work in the US within the broader international refugee and displacement education ecosystem. And Harvard Reach has many great resources on their website that Sarah and her students, her colleagues work on, as does the Immigrant Learning Center. And I hope they'll share their link again. I know they shared this morning all of their resources for educators. And then there are many organizations and districts and programs that you're working with that also have great resources. So again, I want to pause for a moment because we are a community of practice here today. And I'd love for you to share in the chat any other books that you love, websites, URLs that are really helpful to you, that help you situate and ground your work and take a holistic approach to the learners and the communities you're serving. So I'll be quiet again for a moment so we can find those titles or URLs and drop them in the chat. And I'm sure other things will be shared as the day goes on. In closing, I do want to open time for reflection and dialogue because I feel these are both critical to holistic learning. And so I've intentionally kept this brief to offer a few things that hopefully are useful to you. Great, I see things coming in the chat. Thank you so much. But I want us to end with a little conversation. So I'm offering 3 prompts for reflection that think about questions of welcome and belonging. We heard this in Daniela's talk. We know there's a presentation later this afternoon that will focus exclusively or more directly on belonging. But I offer 3 questions for us as a community to come together. The first question is thinking about what gives you a feeling of belonging in a group, in a school, or in a community. And you can make a note in your notebook or in the chat if you want to share, or you can just sit quietly for a moment and think about that. When you feel like you belong, what's in place? What has happened? What creates that feeling for you? Thank you for the responses. I'm seeing smiling, friendly faces, feelings of connection, feeling seen and understood. Daniela, I know, mentioned listening in the previous presentation, very much an important part of that, trust. People calling me by name, thank you, Rachel, and hugs, acceptance. When someone uses my name and spells it correctly with the H, Sarah, thank you. Community and representation, a good laugh, wonderful. So the next question I want you to consider, cohesiveness, thank you. What creates a sense of unbelonging for you? in certain spaces, places, times, or groups. And again, you can sit with that quietly or reflect in your notebook or share in the chat. Thank you. Assumptions, feeling invisible, discrimination, staring, invalidation, being dismissed or ignored, backstabbing, gossip, inside jokes, aggressive tones, assumptions, othering. Final question for reflection as a group here. What can be done to create a stronger sense of both welcome and belonging for our immigrant and refugee children and youth and families in our schools and communities? What can you do? And I'd like to invite everyone to share an idea in the chat so that we walk away again with our hearts full, our heads full, our toolkits full. Showing concern, knowing stories, inclusive activities, reaching out to families and learning from them, creating a community with and for them, being humble, thank you, Brian, and open to new knowledge, smiling, recognizing individuality. And we were pointing to that when we were talking about the unique intersecting identities. No student is the same. Despite the categories, despite the labels, we have to see their individual strengths and power, agency, hopes and dreams. Sharing information in native languages, valuing everyone, moving through the work with an ethic of love. Thank you. Reading others in their language, listening, curiosity, willingness to learn. A help desk. Yes. Thank you, Alice. Is this something you have or you're building? We'd love to know more. That's wonderful. Being clear and genuine, saying hello, being welcoming. This is wonderful. And so I want to say thank you here for your attention and your participation.